an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Time of Contempt, Chapter 5. In this chapter, man, so everybody's going to war. Things are looking pretty bad. There is a moment where you think maybe Ciri's been captured. It's not totally clear at the time, but you find out later that the king believes he has been, what's the word? Bamboozled. That's the word I want, is bamboozled. And I just don't know what to think about all of these different people's choices because, you know, obviously, Geralt is really not impressed, but Geralt's also a purist and super naive who was wrong about everything. So, Geralt, no offense, but maybe we just shouldn't listen to you. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you to Melanie for commissioning this episode. Melanie, man, shit is starting to pop off now. So this chapter is set up as, and so many of them are, but I feel like this one is one where the style that Andres uses in other chapters that has been so confusing for me, this is an example of it working really well. I felt like this, I was able to totally follow and understand exactly what was happening, and I maintained the claim, I guess, that this is a really cinematic way of telling a story, and that it works once you realize what's going on, but you have to sort of change the way you're seeing things in front of your mind's eye. And because it's going in and out of action sequences, it tends to work better, I think, because of that. So we start off with Dandelion, who is being dropped off by a group of men. Now, it turns out that Dandelion has been promised that he would be escorted to the bank of this river, and that he would be shown exactly where to ford across by, let's say, I'm trying to find the exact spot where he tells them, like, he has a signed order that has been given to these guys by somebody specific, and I can't remember. Oh yeah, here it is. I showed your commander the letter from King Venslev, said the troubadour, puffing up. He read the contents, and I heard him order you to escort me to the very edge of Brokilon, and you're going to abandon me here in this thicket? What'll happen if I get lost? So what happens here is actually kind of precious, because Dandelion is one of those that, like, it could go either way when he's faced with this sort of, this kind of setback where somebody is not going to, like, come through for him. Dandelion is sometimes set up to be, like, the silly one who just either overestimates his own prowess or ability, or he is meant to be, like, made the humor of this section, and so he can be made ridiculous. And I wasn't totally sure which direction we were going with here. But as it turns out, things work out pretty well for him in terms of his reputation. Because why he's being abandoned, it's not what I initially thought, which was that these are all soldiers who just, like, don't respect him, don't really care about their work. They were told to bring him to a certain place, and they're going to bring him as close as they can get away with without actually having to do their job, so that they can cut things early and go back home. It's not that simple. As it turns out, this is a super duper dangerous area, and there are dryads that will, like, basically pincushion you with arrows before they let you anywhere near the river, and these guys are not interested in fucking testing those waters because, as he points out, there was a time where the dryads would fire a warning shot, and it would hit a tree, and you'd be like, okay, I'm not going past that point. Noted. Thank you, dryads, for the heads up. But this is a different time, and they don't do that anymore. They don't fire warning shots. And these dudes have heard some shit, and they have done some shit, and that's really the thing. So there's this argument at first about, like, him being left where he's being left. And I'm trying to find the spot. So he says, I shall have to ride alone. Farewell, soldiers. Thank you for the escort. Don't be in such a rush, said the gloomy soldier, looking up at the sky. It'll be evening soon. Set off when the haze starts rising from the water, because, you know, an arrow's not so sure in the fog. If fate smiles on you, the dryads might miss. And he says, I've seen more battlegrounds than a lot of you. I know more about dryads than you. Yada, yada, yada. And when he finally gets to the point, and he's like, so why are they not shooting warning shots anymore? The soldier says, when the kings made a truce with Nilfgaard, they went after the elven gangs with a will. You can tell they're putting the screws on, for there isn't a night that the survivors don't flee through the Brugg, seeking shelter in Brokilon. And when our boys hunt the elves, they sometimes mix it with the dryads, too, those who come to the elves' aid from the far side of the ribbon. And our army has also been known to go too far. Get my drift? Yes, said Dandelion, looking at the soldier intently and shaking his head. When you were hunting the Scoia'tael, you crossed the ribbon, and you killed some dryads, and now the dryads are taking their revenge in the same way. It's war. That it is. So, basically, they're like, they brought this shit on themselves, and now they're out here just abandoning him, and it just makes it so much more, like, kind of insulting. Yeah, we started some shit that it turns out we couldn't finish, and now you're paying the price, and all of us are. Like, damn, guys, fucking, what are you doing? So he sits up straight, Dandelion does, and is basically like, well, I have to go. Duty calls. Evening or no evening, fog or no fog. And it says, the years of practice paid off. The troubadour's voice sounded beautiful and menacing, austere and cold. It rang with iron and valor. The soldiers looked at him in unfeigned admiration. I love this part. I love the gloomy soldier that keeps on chiming in. I love him. Like, those kinds of characters are some of my favorites. Those of you who've read the Song of Ice and Fire books may remember Dolorous Ed, who is one of my favorites in the book. But this guy, before you set off, said the leader, unfastening a flat wooden canteen from his saddle. Neck down some vodka, minstrel, sir. Have a good old swig. It'll make the dying easier, added the gloomy one morosely. The poet sipped from the canteen. A coward, he declared with dignity, when he'd stopped coughing and had got his breath back, dies 100 times. A brave man dies but once. But Dame Fortune favors the brave and holds cowards in contempt. The soldiers looked at him in even greater admiration. They didn't know, and couldn't have known, that Dandelion was quoting from a heroic epic poem, moreover from one written by someone else. Which, like, I get that it's supposed to be that they admire him for his, like, wise words, but honestly, even if you're quoting something, that's still pretty impressive. Quoting things accurately and doing it at the right times is not as easy as books make it seem like. I always think about it, though, because, like, you know, that's something that you see a lot in various pieces of fiction, but a lot of times it goes into Victorian fiction and before, that you have people really quoting lines of Shakespeare or, you know, whole Bible verses and things. And I wonder about it because it seems now to me like such a feat to be able to remember all of that, remember exactly who said it. Like, oftentimes when you're saying it to a person in a scene like that, the person you're speaking to knows who it is and responds with, oh, Tennyson, you know, whatever. And whenever I would read those moments in books as a kid, I would just be like, wow, everybody knew all these quotes and all this stuff, and it's really impressive. But now I sort of realize that it's the same thing as me quoting, like, a couple of lines from The Office, or Friends, or something, that there are just some things that were really in the public consciousness that were super popular. There wasn't a whole lot to choose from during a certain era as well. And everybody had read the same 30 books, and they knew them back to front the way that we know, episodes of Seinfeld back to front. And I really like pointing things out like that, because there's this temptation to think that what we get into now as a society, i.e. episodes of Seinfeld, is somehow less worthy than Shakespeare. And really, when you look at what Shakespeare often is, it's not really when you boil it down to its parts, it's not necessarily more or less meaningful than an episode of Seinfeld, really. Some of Shakespeare's work is just bawdy buffoonery. And that's fine. It's fine. There's just this temptation to think about everything that's got a certain tone and language to it as being also more substantive. And that's not actually the case. It's just that we treat that stuff more seriously. But anyway, so yeah, this thing of this quoting, really, it's just the same as somebody who makes constant pop culture references. But anyway, I just thought that was funny, because I was thinking about it as it's being treated here as sort of a shameful secret that he's quoting something rather than having invented it himself. And really, so fine. So he's quoting something. Who cares? This doesn't make it less impressive. It's what he said was completely correct for the occasion, and it was on point for the moment, and it's fine. So, I shall repay you for the escort with this, said the poet, removing a jingling leather pouch from his bosom. Before you return to the fort, before you're once again embraced by strict mother duty, stop at a tavern and drink my health. Thank you, sir, said the leader, blushing somewhat. You are generous, although forgive us for leaving you alone, but it is nothing. Farewell. So I love this. He's not only made them super impressed with the way he carries himself, but he also pays them even though they didn't really quite do the whole job. Just really insult to injury, but in a total noble, admirable way that does not come across as passive aggressive. It's just really a perfect cherry on top. And I love that he manages this and gets away with it and doesn't fuck it up before he leaves, because that's his worry as well. It says, the cornet in the fort said he was a freeloader, a coward, and a knobhead, but he's a valiant military gentleman, even if he is a poetaster. The voice of the gloomy soldier was carried to Dandelion's ears. Truly spoken, responded the captain. He isn't faint-hearted, you couldn't say that. He didn't even bat an eyelid, I noticed, and on top of that he's whistling. Can you hear? And then he says he's an ambassador. He doesn't know how to say ambassador, so he keeps saying ambassador 3 or 4 times. Dandelion quickened his pace in order to get away as quickly as possible. He didn't want to sabotage the reputation he'd just earned himself. And he knew, with his mouth drying up in terror, that he wouldn't be able to whistle for much longer. Guys, I don't know if any of you have ever succeeded in doing something like this, where you manage to make a certain impression, and it's so perfectly what you wanted, and you're terrified that you're somehow going to ruin it. But I've done it once or twice in my life, and it's simultaneously the most satisfying thing in the whole world, and also vaguely terrifying, because to a degree it's not really who you are, and there could be any number of ways that you will unintentionally ruin it. And I just really love this whole setup, because like I said, I wasn't sure if Dandelion would be able to pull this off. I was kind of wondering if he wasn't going to make this big show about how he wasn't afraid and whatever, and then he would come shooting out of the trees being chased by dryads and completely ruin the effect, But it turns out that he actually manages to keep it together throughout this whole bit of travel all by himself, and that's really not easy. Traveling alone when you are in a strange place is nerve-wracking in the best of times. Even if you've got money in your pocket, if you've got GPS on your phone, even when you know, that you're going to be okay, it's still very nerve-wracking. And he's going into this fucking area that's hostile, and unfamiliar all by himself. So let's see, he's talking to Pegasus, his horse, a couple of times and sort of narrating what's going on, which I love so much. "The hero rode," mumbled Dandelion, wiping the cold sweat from the nape of his neck with a handkerchief, "rode fearlessly through the wilderness, heedless of the leaping lizards and flying dragons. He rode and rode until he reached a vast expanse of water." So I just love how he keeps like dramatizing what's going on, exaggerating everything, the whole thing. And finally, he manages to make it through to a spot where he can sit down and take a little break. And he knows that he's like on the border and that if they choose to shoot him here, there's just nothing he can do about it. He has to take this risk. So he sits down and he gets out his lute. And he starts to sing a song that is completely in, I believe, Elvish. And we find out later that he not only is this song in Elvish, but it's also been like accentuated with Elvish music in parts, which evidently Geralt doesn't know anything about, has no opinion on. But he believes, Dandelion does, that this made a difference in his reception. Because it turns out the dryads are watching him. And I love how this is written. He didn't hear, but he felt somebody's presence. "Don't shoot," he whispered, obediently not looking around. Although his fingers had turned cold and numb on the strings, and he had difficulty making any sound whatsoever emerge from his throat, he obeyed. There was no hostility in the dryad's voice, and he was a professional, damn it. It's so good. So finally, he is taken to Geralt, and this is apparently where Geralt was nursed back to health, because I don't know how many of you remember, but the last chapter ended with Geralt basically being crushed by a boulder. Like, that's not what happened, but it may as well have been, because the guy that he went up against, Vigaforts, was like, no joke, super, super fucking fast. Broke his legs, his arm, like, he just fucking crushed this guy to a fine powder. And these dryads had to try and put him back together again from the powder. And they seem to have managed to do it, but he has some lasting damage that they aren't sure he's going to be able to, like, move. Like, even as a witcher who has better powers of healing and just has, like, a body that can take more of a beating than the average human being, it still seems like what he suffered was so intensely altering that even his improved, what's the word I want? Stamina? Nah, something like that though. But it's still not enough. He's still going to have to cope with some long-term consequences from this fight. Melanie says the song is about a magical flower, memories, and tears. Eteriel, the song's subject matter, is an elf heroine. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I was actually wondering about that, like, if this is, because it's written as if it's a whole extant language. So I'm wondering if there is, like, some place that you can just translate everything, or if it's, like, something that he's only written the language for the specific songs, and you just have to, like, figure it out, or what. So Dandelion is very grateful that Geralt is okay. I mean, mostly okay. And there is a camp that they can stay at, but they don't, like, they're amongst dryads and trees, and it is a bad place to try and light a fire. Like, the trees don't like fire, dryads don't like it either. So they have to just make do with this, like, blue light that comes from some kind of strange moss, and it's a combination of things that it feels magical, that sort of give off this light but not any heat, which at least there's light, but it's very, very cold, and Dandelion is, like, crestfallen at the fact that they aren't able to light a fire here. So they start talking about what's going on because Geralt has been here getting healed and is totally out of it. Like, he just doesn't know what's going on in the world. And he keeps on asking about where Yennefer and Ciri are. And for his part, poor Dandelion doesn't really want to talk about them. I think this is bad news. But he never really quite tells what's going on. And I'm not sure if it's because he thinks that the Ciri that we see later is the real one and has fallen for the trick, or if that is the real Ciri and this king is the only one who thinks it's a trick. But we'll get there in a second. So, let's see. Okay, he says... when we get to their capital, the famous Dune Canal, concealed in the very heart of the forest, we'll never get there, Dandelion. What? I thought... But they've given you sanctuary. After all, they tolerate... You've chosen the right word. They both said nothing for a long time. So, tell me what's happening in the world while they've been tending to me here. First, said Dandelion, coughing softly, tell me what really happened in Garstang. Didn't Triss tell you? Yes, she did, but I'd like to hear your version. Geralt, I don't know what happened to Yennefer and Ciri. No one does. Triss doesn't either. Did I ask you about Ciri or Yennefer? Tell me about the war. But he does ask. Like, he's trying to act like, oh, that's not what this is about, you fucking liar. Of course that's what this is about. Stop it. So he says the Nilfgaardians attacked Lyria and Aedirn without declaring war. The reason was supposedly an attack by Demaven's forces on some border fort in Dol Angra, which happened during the Mages' conclave on Thanedd. Some people say it was a setup, that they were Nilfgaardians disguised as Demaven soldiers. We'll probably never find out what really happened. In any case, Nilfgaard's retaliation was swift and overwhelming. The border was crossed by a powerful army which must have been concentrated in Dol Angra for weeks, if not months. Spala and Scala, the two Lyrian border strongholds, were captured right away in just 3 days. Rivia was prepared for a siege lasting months, but capitulated after 2 days under the pressure of the guilds and the merchants who were promised that, should the town open its gates and pay a ransom, it wouldn't be sacked. Was the promise kept? Yes. Interesting. Promises being kept in these times? I won't mention that in the past no one would have dreamed of making promises like that because no one would have expected them. Craftsmen and merchants never opened the gates of strongholds. They defended them. Each guild had its own tower. Money has no fatherland, Geralt. The merchants don't care whose rule they make their money under, and the Nilfgaardian palatine doesn't care what he levies taxes on. Dead merchants don't make money or pay taxes. So, really, this is the beginning of, like, shit really going left. And the whole way that it's suspected this was all a setup, they were, like, they're using some sort of excuse to wage this war. This just is so infuriating because as I get older, you know, there's this, and I've talked about this a lot in the past couple of years. When you're a kid, you really think that there are rules. And there are, to a degree. But as you get older, you start to realize that a lot of what we look at as rules are actually simply like cultural expectations or traditions. And that in truth, when it comes down to it, if you have enough power, you can kind of do what you want and nobody can really do anything if the law, in all caps, isn't willing to hold you accountable for it. And so this is, you know, the thing that's come up recently with like the Panama Papers, where there was all this like exposure of billionaires and the ways that they were like laundering and holding money and all of these like illegal practices for creating tax shelters and whatnot. All of this information came out, and guess what happened? Absolutely fucking nothing, because the people who are in power are the ones who are enforcing laws, and they can make it so that this doesn't fucking have any consequences to it. And so you're reading this thing, and there's this whole, like, you know, well, we don't even know that it was really Demaven soldiers that did the thing that supposedly caused the counterattack. And we'll probably never know. Like, as a child, I just couldn't accept that. There's no way that I'd be like, you'd just never find out. But if we find out that that wasn't Demoven soldiers, then that gives them just cause to, like, you know, retaliate, or people will back them up, right? And it's like, no, that's not how it works. Whoever has the power in the moment can say whatever, and whether it's true or not is totally irrelevant. Whether or not people believe it is also irrelevant. All that matters is that this is the official narrative, and we're going to go with this because I say so, and I'll kill you if you don't. And it may come out 100 years down the line that everybody knew this was bullshit. Everybody knew that no, this wasn't true. But in the moment, it accomplishes what it's meant to accomplish, which is we need to start a war. The end. Guess what? The war is started. They got what they wanted. It's all like, I feel like there is so much that I am being educated on in terms of rules really don't matter to anybody except the poor and the marginalized. Then the law and rules are weaponized, if anything, against them to justify retroactively taking steps that are inhumane and horrible. But in terms of it being used, like, to hold people in check who have power already, not even a little bit. Like, that's just so not the point. And the idea of doing that is almost laughable because, like, you know, it's like doing open heart surgery on yourself. So then we go to one of these little vignettes where we find out what's going on here. And we are hanging out with the Chamberlain Everson. And Everson is, so let's see, I'm going to read this. A messenger has arrived from the field. We have triumphed. The battle is won. We have vanquished our foe. We have beaten him into the ground. And this Chamberlain Everson is not as excited as everybody else is. And Everson is looking at him at first, and he's just kind of like, guys, are you really this stupid? And then he has to stop and be like, you know what? I shouldn't be surprised that they don't understand the extent to which this damage is done, because all they can see is that it's victory. Of course, all they can see is the fact that we have managed to crush these people. But the thing is that they don't have the long view of what's about to happen. So this is when he starts to, like, kind of piece apart exactly how this is going to go. So he starts issuing different instructions about, and this is really upsetting. Each one of you heard Field Marshal Cohorn's speech yesterday to his officers. I would like to point out, gentlemen, that what the Marshal said to his men does not apply to you. You are to execute other assignments and orders. War to the castles, peace to the villages, Cohorn said to his commanders yesterday. You know that principle. You learned it in our officer training. That principle applied until today. From tomorrow, you're to forget it. From tomorrow, a different principle applies, which will now be the battle cry of war we are waging. War on everything alive. War on everything that can burn. You are to leave scorched earth behind you. From tomorrow, we take war beyond the line we will withdraw behind after signing the treaty. We are withdrawing, but there is to be nothing but scorched earth beyond that line. The kingdoms of Rivia and Aedirn are to be reduced to ashes. Before the soldiers leave the scorched earth behind them, your task will be to remove from that earth and that land everything you can, anything that may increase the riches of our fatherland. You will be responsible for loading and transporting harvested and stored crops. You will be responsible for livestock. Slaughter any sick or suspect specimens and burn the carcasses. Drive the rest south along the designated routes. And so then he has a special task, and he's like looking at them and thinking through about who he's going to choose. And there is an interesting internal monologue happening, and it says, who wants to be a bailiff or a reeve? who, when asked by their sons on returning home what they did during the war, wants to say he measured bushels of grain, counted stinking pelts, and weighed wax as he led a convoy of carts laden with spoils along rutted roads, covered in ox shit, and drove herds of lowing and bleeding beasts, swallowing dust and flies and breathing in the stench. So there was a part of like going to war that I didn't really think about, and that really put it all into perspective. So dismantle and remove, and orders and order. That leaves the most important things, the ore mines and their yields. Coinage, valuables, works of art, but I'll take care of that myself in person. So he's looking at everything, calculating how things have gone, and this is when we get the real breakdown of exactly how this is going to go. And it's really fucking depressing. The siege column was overtaken by some light cavalry. Evertson recognized them as the Dukes of Winneberg's tactical company, one of those redeployed from Sintra by the designs on its pennants. Yes, they have something to be pleased about. The battle won, the army from Adern routed. Reserves will not be deployed in a heavy battle against the regular army. They will be pursuing forces in retreat, wiping out scattered, leaderless groups. They will murder, pillage, and burn. They're pleased because it promises to be a pleasant, jolly little war. A little war that isn't exhausting and doesn't leave you dead. The tactical company combines 10 ordinary companies and numbers 2,000 horse. Although the Winnebergians will probably not take part in any large battle now, no fewer than a sixth of their number will fall in skirmishes. Then there will be camps and bivouacs, rotten victuals, filth, lice, mosquitoes, contaminated water. Then the inevitable will come. Typhus, dysentery, malaria, which will kill no fewer than a quarter. To that you should include an estimate for unpredictable occurrences, usually around 1/5 of the total. 800 will return home, no more, and probably far fewer. So, like, damn, he's just figuring it out and just realizing, yeah, maybe like a third of them, if we're in a good way, a little more than that, will make it back. It's just like, these people are just so disposable, and they are all aware of that fact and aware of how, like, it's just pieces on a chessboard, really. Vengerberg fell after a week-long siege, finished Dandelion. It may surprise you, but the guilds courageously defended their towers and sections of wall until the very end. So the entire garrison and all the townspeople were slaughtered. It must have been around 6,000 people. When news of it got out, a great flight began. Defeated regiments and civilians began to flee to Temeria and Redania en masse. Crowds of fugitives headed along the Pontar Valley in the masses of the Mecham. But not all of them managed to escape. Mounted Nilfgaardian troops followed them and cut off their escape. You know what I'm driving at? No, I don't. I don't know much about war, Dandelion. I'm talking about captives, about slaves. They wanted to take as many prisoners as possible. It's the cheapest form of labor for Nilfgaard. That's why they pursued the fugitives so doggedly. It was a huge manhunt, Geralt, easy pickings, because the army had run away and no one was left to defend the fleeing civilians. So, then we go to another vignette with people named Villis and Rayla. These names are ringing a little bit of a bell, but I don't know if I know who they are. And Rayla is kind of a badass, and they are meant to be keeping up the rear guard. They aren't the rear guard yet, but the rear guard that they had is being wiped out, and so now they are the rear guard. And they have to decide whether or not they're going to scatter and sort of abandon their duty, or if they're going to stick to, their people and do what they are being paid to do. Should we delay the pursuers? The people who manage to cross into the people will manage to cross into Temeria to cross the mountains. There are women and children among you. What are you gawping at? It's our trade. This is what we're paid for. Remember? The soldiers looked at one another. For a moment, Rayla thought they would actually run away, that they would rouse their wet and exhausted horses for a last desperate effort, that they would race past the column of fugitives towards the pass and safety. She was wrong. She had misjudged them. They upset a cart on the road. They quickly built a barricade, a makeshift barricade, not very high, and absolutely ineffectual. They didn't have to wait long. 2 horses, snorting and stumbling, lurched into the ravine, strewing flecks of froth around. Only one of them bore a rider. So it turns out to be somebody that's on their side, and he's come to warn them. And it's just basically like, they are right behind me, they are fucking shit up, and it's not actually the Nilfgaardians, it's the squirrels that are, like, fucking with us. One of the soldiers wailed piercingly, another sat down heavily, burying his face in his hands. And Rayla says that they all need to get to their positions, and she swears that they will not take us alive. And later on, one of them says to her, as he's dying, "You promised." And she kills him. And that's part of what she does in this whole section, is just make sure that none of them are taken alive, because they will be tortured like no other. Like, we hear about this a couple different times. There's no doubt about it. So she is making sure that everybody is dispatched completely. And "Throw down your sword, woman," repeated the rider, because she winds up being the last one. The mercenary laughed horribly and wiped her face with her cuff, smearing sweat mixed with dust and blood. "My sword costs too much to be thrown away, elf. If you want to take it, you'll have to break my fingers. I'm Black Rayla. What are you waiting for?" She did not have to wait long. "Did no one come to relieve Eredern? I understood there were allegiances, agreements about mutual aid, treaties," asked the Witcher. "Redania," said Dandelion, clearing his throat, "is in disarray after Visimir's death." "Did you know King Visimir was murdered?" "Queen Hedwig," what's up, guys, "has assumed power, but Bedlam has broken out across the land, and terror. Scoia'tael and Nilfgaardian spies are being hunted. Jixtra raged through the entire country. The scaffolds were running with blood. Redania, plunged into chaos itself, was incapable of raising an army to support Aedern." And then when he brings up Temeria, Dandelion tells him about an envoy that was sent to Temeria. And what this comes down to is that Temeria is being sort of strong-armed into dropping the allegiance that they had. So, and it's really embarrassing, but it's also the kind of thing that, like, if you're a ruler and it's your responsibility to protect the people that you rule, you have to choose between doing what is honorable and what's actually going to save their lives. And those things frequently do not match up. So this Nilfgaardian emissary that comes to talk to the king, there are a lot of people who really feel that they should not be entertaining an emissary at all. That this person should fucking be killed because they represent Nilfgaard, and after what Nilfgaard has pulled, this is totally unacceptable. But, you know, tradition dictates that somebody who is an emissary, it's the don't kill a messenger thing, right? It's like they are not to be held responsible for the people whom they represent. They are supposed to be treated with dignity and heard and, you know, talked to and then sent to, because otherwise everything is just total chaos. But what it comes down to is the king comes in after this, like, long talk, and he says, "Vengerberg is under siege and will fall any day now. Nilfgaard is pushing northwards relentlessly. The surrounded troops continue to fight, but that will change nothing. Aedern is lost. King Demavend has fled. The fate of Queen Meve is unknown. In a few days, the Nilfgaardians will take our eastern border, by which I mean the mouth of the Pontar Valley. And Hague, Aedern's last fortress, will not withstand them, and Hague is our eastern border, and on our southern, something very unfortunate has occurred. King Ervil of Vedin has sworn fealty to Emperor Emhyr. He has surrendered and opened the strongholds at the mouth of the Yaruga. Nilfgaardian garrisons are already installed in Nastrog, Rosrog, and Bodrog, which were supposed to have protected our flank. Owing to that, Ervil has retained his royal title, but Emhyr is his sovereign. Verden remains a kingdom, but de facto is now a Nilfgaardian province. Do you understand what that means? So basically, he's like, we're fucking, like, just cornered. You know, what it comes down to is that, yes, I could make a stand and respect the traditions and the allegiances, but y'all know that's just going to be posturing, and we're all going to die if I do that. Responsibility for my country and my subjects rests on me. The emperor has offered me a proposition, and I have accepted it. You will say that I am bringing you peace. So Foltest crumbled, muttered the Witcher. He struck a deal with Nilfgaard and left Aedirn to its fate. Yes, agreed the poet. However, he sent his army to the Pontar Valley and occupied and manned the stronghold at Hague. And the Nilfgaardians didn't march into the Mahakam Pass or cross the Yaruga. They didn't attack Brugge. That was without doubt the price of Temeria's neutrality. Ciri was right, whispered the Witcher. Neutrality. Neutrality is always contemptible. Listen, guys, I'm not going to lie to you. I feel that way. I said that when Ciri was saying it earlier. I was on her side, and I'll say it again. But this isn't somebody being neutral and, like, it being a sort of a false front for pure cowardice. This was somebody who's had hundreds, maybe thousands of people's lives in their hands. And so I can't help but feel a different way about it here. It feels less like neutrality to me in this case and more like, I don't even know what to call it so much as just self-defense, but without the violence of what that usually sounds like. So then he asks Dandelion, so who came to their aid? Like, somebody had to have done something. Cadwyn ought to support Demavend out of good sense. There may no longer be faith nor truth in the world, but surely good sense still exists. What say you? Is there still good sense in the world, or do only contemptibility and contempt remain? Dandelion turned his head away. The green lanterns were close. They were surrounding them in a tight ring. He hadn't noticed it earlier, but now he understood. All the dryads had been listening in to his story. You say nothing, said Geralt, which means that Ciri was right. Codringer was right. You were all right. Only I, the naive, anachronistic, and stupid Witcher, was wrong. So, yeah, I mean, you know, this is another thing that I struggle with a lot is really, when it comes down to it, setting aside the actual, like, belief systems of people who are religious fundamentalists, people who are racist, if we just put that in a basket and put that off to the side, and we look at what would actually, if you're thinking about it in terms of common sense, be beneficial to them. Socialization of our economy and our healthcare would simply make decent sense. It would do them good as well. I know a whole lot of people who are conservatives who are suffering under these changes that are happening and yet support it, even though it's them who are also being hurt by it. And this thing that the Witcher says about surely common sense at least remains. How many times have I said that and thought that over the past couple of years? And it's just not a fucking factor. Like, it's just not. People are petty and small and scared. And they are willing to harm themselves if it means harming people they see as opponents. And that's just like, they're fine with it. And I just really, in that moment when he says that, I was just like, oh God, I hear echoes of my own voice here, you know? So then we have this thing with the, this centurion who has a nickname, Half Gallon. This is another vignette, because he can drink so much and just be fine, basically. And he goes in to talk to some of the soldiers who try to hide their barrel of vodka from him because they know how much he can drink. But he can smell it. And he's like, give me a fucking break, guys. Pull that shit out and pour me some. Because guess what? This is going to be a conversation. So Bose says, are we marching on the Nilfgaardians or are we going to hang around on the border like a bunch of spare pricks at a wedding? Guys, y'all, a bunch of spare pricks at a wedding? I don't know about you, but I never heard that one before. Lord of mercy. And when when he says that to him, Half Gallon's just basically like, yeah, you're really tough when there's nothing to be done. Like, you're acting like you just want to get out there so bad. That's because there's nothing happening right now. Just wait until you actually see what this shit is like. And everybody is essentially like, we'd like to see what this shit is like because we've been sleeping in our boots, waiting for some shit to happen, constantly on alert. And frankly, it's kind of exhausting and we'd like to just get it over with, whatever the fuck is going to happen. So he tells them we're going to be crossing the border at dawn. And he says, prick up your ears because I won't tell you twice. And they're unusual orders. He tells them about the Nilfgaardians crushing Lyria, Aldersburg, all of this. Now they're heading swiftly northwards. They're heading towards us. So the orders from the Dunbanner are as follows. Cross the border, march hard south, straight for the Valley of the Flowers. We have 3 days to get to the River Dinf. I repeat, 3 days, which means we'll be marching at a trot. And when we get there, not a step across, Difney, not a step. After, the Nilfgaardians will show up on the far bank. We do not engage them in no way. Even if they try to cross the river, we're only to show them our colors. That's it. What? Mumbled Bode finally. We aren't to fight the Nilfgaardians? Are we going to war? No. What is all this about? That's our orders. We aren't going to war, but to give fraternal help. We're crossing the border to give protection to the people of Upper Aedern. Not from Aedern, but from Lormark. And he says, the Demovind has suffered a defeat. He's tripped up and is lying flat on his face because he governed poorly and his politics were crap. So that's the end of him and the end of the whole of Aedern with him. Our king lent Demovind a pretty penny because he gave him help. One cannot allow wealth like that to be lost. So now it's time to get that money back with interest. So, that's the agreement our Grace, King Hensel, has concluded with the Emir of Nilfgaard. Agreements or no agreements, the Dunbanner is to station itself by the river. Do you understand? And everybody is just like, I cannot believe this is happening. Are you serious? And Half Gallon's just like, you know what? I get it. I get why you guys are having this reaction. Frankly, I kind of have it as well. But guess what? We're not here to think. We're here to follow orders. We're the army. We're not the rulers. We're not nobles. We don't know politics. So we have to do what we're told. What will happen if the army of Aedern resists or bars the road? We are to be on the banks of the Difney in 3 days and no later. Whoever tries to delay us or stop us is an enemy, and our enemies can be cut to ribbons. Burn no villages, nor cottages, take no goods from anyone, do not plunder, rape no women. Make sure you and your men remember this. So Zivik has to go off and give these orders. And when he does, he tells them, if you're going to rape women, do it on the DL and out of sight. Which I was like, Zivik, come on. But yeah. And when he says don't loot, everybody's like, what are you fucking talking about, don't loot? And he kind of realizes that he has to give them raping women because not looting is bad enough. But if they are being told to basically just be good boys, nobody's going to fucking listen. So he has to throw him a bit of a bone here. They shook hands, finished Dandelion, on the bridge of the river Difney. Margrave Mansfield of Ard Carai, and Menno Cohorn, the commander-in-chief of the Nilfgaardian armies from Dol Angra. They shook hands over the bleeding, dying kingdom of Aedern, sealing a criminal division of the spoils, the most despicable gesture history has ever known. So, yeah, yikes. It's not even like I was cornered. This is for money. You know, this is just somebody trying to recoup his bad investment, basically. Yikes. So, at this point, Geralt asks about all of the sorcerers that were with the council and were at this event that he had been to. He says not one of them remained with Demavend, while Foltest drove all those who had served him out of Temeria. Philippa is in Tretogor, helping Queen Hedwig to bring the chaos reigning in Redania under control. With her is Triss and 3 others whose names I can't recall. Several of them are in Cadwyn. Many of them escaped Cover and Hangfors. They chose neutrality because Esther and Thesan are and were neutral. And he asks about Vilgefortz, to which Dandelion is like, he fucking vanished. Nobody knows what the hell happened to him. And then we get a little mini vignette of the elf sorceress that we had seen, who was so beautiful. She was supposed to be like one of the most beautiful women alive, who has become the queen of the, what is it called? The Valley of Flowers? Yeah, Valley of Flowers, which apparently like the army has burned to the ground. There are like these amazing gardens that were supposed to be there, or not the army that like took it over, but the army before they left. They burned it so that the people who took the place after him would not be able to enjoy it or get anything out of it. So we achieved more than we could have hoped for, said the Queen. We have finally recovered our Valley of the Flowers after 100 years. We have our country once more. We are our people again, no longer outcasts, and the ash will nourish the soil. In the spring, the valley will blossom anew. That is too little, Daisy. It is ever too little. We've come down a station or 2. Not long ago, we boasted we would push the humans back to the sea whence they came, and now we have narrowed our borders and ambitions to Dol Blathan. And she's basically, because the guy that she's talking to, I think his name is Phyllis something. She's essentially like, dude, what do you want from me? Like, I am doing my best. These people are really powerful. I know what we said we were going to do, but do you see a way to fucking do that? Because I don't see it myself. And we've been given this property, but it's not for nothing. It isn't out of generosity. We have to defend it. We have to keep it. And that's going to be a fucking trick. And I mean, we're basically, keeping this is more than we're up to, really, when you get down to it. So we need to take it slow. And he says that they have to go and help the bandits in the woods. And she is like, or the commandos. And she says, essentially, we're not allowed to do that. We have to just let them keep fighting. And this dude is like, excuse me? What the fuck do you mean we just let them die? And she's like, basically, yep. The commandos must continue to fight. They must disrupt the human kingdoms and hinder their preparations for war. That is the order of Emir, and I may not oppose it. Forgive me. I forgive you, Enid, but I do not know if they will. So, at this point, this is when really Geralt is like the most shocked at this point. He's like, none of the sorcerers helped against Nilfgaard. Not a single one? None of them? And he's just like, nope. I can't believe, he said finally, very softly, I can't believe none of them left Vilgefortz when the real causes and effects of his treachery came to light. I am, as is generally known, a naive, stupid, and anachronistic witcher, but I still cannot believe that the conscience of not one sorcerer was pricked. So then we get one sorcerer whose conscience was pricked, Tissaia de Vry. And I knew what was coming. Just the fact, like, she was writing this letter and she sort of stares out into space. And at this point, I'm like, all right, girl. So apparently, you know, because I was saying last episode that I kind of agreed with Tisaya about her assessment of everything regarding the elves and the way that this was like, just like humans running roughshod over everything the way that they always had. But then when Philippa was like, listen, I know that that sounds like a noble fucking cause, but it's not like that. This is a human being using the cause of the elves for his own reasons. It's not really their cause. Tisaya is realizing that what Philippa said is basically true, and that she helped out a guy who has wound up being the key to like unraveling fucking everything. And she writes this letter and then gets into bed and cuts her wrists. And that's pretty much it. It's a little like vignette that I'm not totally sure Dandelion tells Geralt, or if we're just seeing it, because there's no like response from Geralt about this, and I assume that this is going to be news that eventually travels to them, but I don't think it's something that Dandelion knew about. I think this is just the reader being told, rather than it being one of the many stories. So then the Witcher says, you were just going to tell me about Yennefer, and he's like, no, I wasn't. And he says, you ought to know why I'm keeping my counsel and not repeating the gossip I've heard. You also ought to be able to guess what the gossip is and why I want to spare you it. And Dandelion, like, there's a little break here, and it's sort of weird. The Witcher goes to shave, and Dandelion sort of wanders out into the woods, and it's the middle of the night. And he runs into a dryad who speaks in English with no accent. And basically, she lays it at Dandelion's feet. What's going on with Geralt? I asked if you had a hand in this, but I think there was no need. It's obvious you had a hand in it. It's obvious you are his friend. And if someone has friends and he loses everything in spite of that, it's obvious the friends are to blame for what they did or what they didn't do. What could I have done? I don't know, answered the dryad. I didn't tell him everything. I know. I'm not guilty of anything. Yes, you are. No, I am not. And he sort of jumps up and then kind of shakes his head and looks around because Geralt's there talking to him, and this fucking dryad he was just speaking with is nowhere to be seen. And Geralt tells him that maybe he dreamed it because this like area is so full of magic that can happen. I don't know if it was like a sending that was meant to confuse him or if it was his conscience or what. But it appears that Dandelion is going to finally be honest and tell him what happened. So this is when he tells him about the whole thing with the supposedly fake Ciri, whom I'm not sure that Dandelion believes is fake. But yeah, he says, you know something about Ciri, don't you? I can't just leave her to her fate. She's completely alone. She cannot be left alone, Dandelion. You'll never understand that. No one will ever understand that. But I know if she remains alone, the same thing will happen to her as once happened to me. You'll never understand that. I do understand, which is why I'm coming with you. You're insane. Do you know where I'm headed? Yes, I do. Geralt, I haven't told you anything. I'm feeling guilty. I didn't do anything. I didn't know what to do. But now I know. I want to go with you and be by your side. I never told you about Ciri and the rumors that are circulating. I met some acquaintances from Kovir, and they in turn had heard the reports of some envoys who had returned from Nilfgaard. So this is when we see this huge gathering of courtiers in Nilfgaard, and King Emir is he steps out in the middle of a bunch of gossiping, where everybody is talking about how Ciri has been captured, that Emir has seemingly like put aside his mistress, which makes them all think that he's going to marry her. And a lot of people are like, he's not going to marry her. Like, she's fucking way too young. And also, like, we're not sure about her bloodline and yada, yada, yada. All of this, like, bickering. And finally, he steps in and he has his, like, moment in front of everyone. And he announces to everybody that this girl that they lead in is Ciri. And oh my God, guys, I said Ciri, and my Siri on my phone turned on and was just like, can I help you with something? I'm surprised it hasn't happened before now, considering how often I say the name. But yeah, she, like, the girl that comes in, like, is stumbling, and I think that's supposed to be our clue that that's fucking not Ciri, because she's so incredibly, like, graceful and in command of her body that stumbling and being awkward is not a thing for her. But I also was willing to overlook that and think it was Ciri simply because she's so scared. But, you know, whatever the case. So the Queen of Sintra is not doing awesome and is kind of plain and, like, cultish. Let's see. The Queen of Sintra stumbled a second time. The Imperator placed an elbow on the armrest of the throne and touched his cheek with his hand. He was smiling. Stella Congreve was close enough to recognize that smile. She froze in horror. Something is not right, she thought. Something is not right. Heads will fall. And this is our hint that Emir is seeing her for the first time and knows that she's not really Ciri. And that they are lying. Somebody's lying. And he's going with it for now because he needs to buy some time. But for the moment, he's letting everybody think that this is really Ciri. And he says, you know, he announces who she is and how everybody's turned her back on her except for us, and I want everybody to know it. And then he says, I'm endowing you with the title of Duchess and the castle of Darn Rowan, where you will now travel. And everybody's really surprised because they had all thought for sure he was going to be marrying her. And this is another clue that, like, this is not the right person, because I think he was planning on doing that. And then he calls a meeting. And the Seneschal, who I think he's holding responsible for, supposedly finding her, but it's not actually her. He also says that he wants them to go and get Rince and I can't remember the other person that but he wants to torture them and then come to them and find out what the fuck happened. And he also gets an astrologer who he wants to use to, like, locate somebody, which I'm guessing is going to be Ciri. And I'm trying to find the last part. Oh, yeah, and he assigns Tawny Owl to figure out where the fuck Vilgefortz went. And he's like, and you're going to have to bring some men with you. And the guys you pick, make sure they're not fucking afraid of magic, because you can't afford that. This guy is going to be tough. So get ready for that. Yeah, here it is. Order them to arrest Rince and Count K here. Take the two captives to Darn Ruach and subject them to torture. When they've softened up a little, I'll ask them personally. And at the end, let's see. I'm over time here. Your unit will be charged with attacking and capturing the hideout of Vilgefortz, the whereabouts of which is currently unknown. And they ask about whether or not he can kill Vilgefortz. And the Emperor's like, yeah, definitely. Please kill him. Like, that would be great. And yeah. And then it ends with him saying, instead of the real Cyrilla of Sintra, I've been sent some kind of dolt. Those traitors probably told themselves that I would not recognize her, but I will know the real Ciri. I would know her at the end of the world and in the darkness of hell. And that is the end of the chapter. And then there's a small bit after that about luring unicorns, because they like to lay their heads in the laps of virgin young women, and that hunters would use virgins to lure unicorns out but that it became clear soon that the maidenhood of a woman wasn't enough, that she also had to be youthful. And it ends with, being a wise creature, the unicorn indubitably knows that remaining too long in the state of maidenhood is suspicious and counter to the natural order, which is super funny to me because, like, I mean, it feels like that's a commentary leading to something. And I'm wondering if that has to do with Ciri, because she's not, you know, actually like pursuing anybody, and she's getting to an age where that's going to start to be like, she's 14, I think, or 15. I don't know what that's supposed to be about, but like how that's relevant, but I'll be interested to see. All right. So I'm way over time, so I have to wrap up, but thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Thank you for Melanie for this. Thank you to Melanie for this commission. I liked this section a lot, and, I was able to follow pretty much everything, which, yay, that's 2 in a row now. And hopefully you guys enjoyed the coverage, and I will see you again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.